Hello, everyone. I want to thank you for being here today to join us in an important discussion on Black women on food sovereignty hosted by FoodShare. My name is Rosie Mensah, and I am on the board of directors of FoodShare and the chair of the advocacy committee. I'm also a registered dietitian and a longtime member of the Black Creek Food Justice Network, a grassroots food justice group in the Jane and Finch community in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. I am humbled to be able to moderate today's panel discussion with amazing Black women in food, where we will discuss what food sovereignty means and learn how we can advance it. To open today's gathering, I will now share our land acknowledgement, and I ask that you listen attentively and reflect on the words being said. FoodShare acknowledges the sacred land in which we operate and where we all reside, known as Toronto. We acknowledge that FoodShare is situated upon the traditional territories of the Wendat, Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabeg, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the New Credit. This territory is covered by the Dish with One Spoon, Wampum Pelt Covenant, an agreement between Haudenosaunee and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the land around the Great Lakes. We also recognize the many nations of Indigenous people who presently live on this land and the ancestors who have hunted and gathered on this land, known as Turtle Island. We also recognize that Indigenous sovereignty and Black liberation are connected struggles that both acknowledge and require the dismantling of white supremacy. For us to achieve Black sovereignty, liberation, and independence, we must also achieve sovereignty, liberation, and independence for Indigenous people who continue to experience ongoing genocide and subjugation and the destruction and theft of their traditional lands and territories. I invite you to take a moment to consider what this acknowledgement means to you and think about ways in which we can continue to support the process of reconciliation. For those that are new to FoodShare, we're a food justice organization that works alongside communities across the city of Toronto. We support the development of community-led produce markets, school-based food initiatives, community-led urban farms, and other community-led initiatives. We also operate social enterprises, and you might already be familiar with our Good Food Box. If you live in Toronto, consider ordering one today. FoodShare recognizes that we must acknowledge and actively work to dismantle systemic forms of oppression that exist throughout the food system, such as anti-Black racism, colonialism, white supremacy, and capitalism, which are some of the organizing principles in many of our systems and institutions. FoodShare also recognizes the amazing voices and talents and successes of Black women are not celebrated as often or as loudly as they deserve. That is why we are thrilled to be able to bring together a group of incredible Black leaders for a discussion on Black food sovereignty. So thanks again for being here, and I will be welcoming our wonderful panelists. And before I get to that, I do want to encourage you to be active on social media during the panel, utilize Twitter, live tweet to really engage and to continue this conversation. So thanks again for being here, and please join me in welcoming our wonderful panelists. So today we have Karen Washington, who is a community food advocate and co-founder of Black Urban Growers in the USA. So thank you, Karen, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So next we have Leticia Deawuo, who is the director of Black Creek Community Farm here in Canada. Hi, Leticia.
Hi, thanks for having me, Rosie.
And next I'd like to introduce Dee Woods, who is a good food actionist and co-founder of the Granville Community Kitchen and located in the UK. Hi, Dee. Thank you for being here. And next we have Cheyenne Sundance, the founder of Sundance Harvest Urban Farm located here in Canada. Hi, Cheyenne. We would also like to welcome our two ASL interpreters, Christopher and Marcia, both from Toronto Sign Language Interpreter Service. Thank you for being here today. Okay. Well, again, thank you so much for everyone for being here today for this important and well-needed conversation. To get started, I wanted to ask you all, and feel free to take turns. So you are all really incredibly passionate about the work that you do. Can you tell us more about your work and what you love most about it? Karen, did you want to start us off?
Yes, so hi everyone, I'm Karen Washington from the US, I'm a farmer. What I love about my work is, first of all, I'm an agitator, I'm an advocate. I think that the time is changing where Black voices are being heard. This is a unique opportunity in our lifetime to make sure that our history around agriculture is set right. And I just love what I'm seeing with a lot of Black lives, especially around the youth, taking up the torch and really going for justice and equity.
Thank you, Karen. It's great. And I did want to actually ask one more thing while you're giving us that, what the work that you do, what inspires you as well as part, so the work that you do, what you love most about it, and what continues and inspires you to continue doing that?
It's the youth that continues to inspire me.
Great. Leticia, so I wanted to ask you next. So can you tell us more about your work and what you love most about it, as well as what continues to keep you inspired?
So I am one of the founding members of Jane Finch Action Against Poverty. I've been doing community organizing work for over 14 years. In terms of my current role at the Black Creek Community Farm, we are trying to do our best in terms of addressing food insecurity within our community. Also doing environmental education programs for kids from kindergarten all the way to high school. In terms of what I love about my work, I think, I'm an extrovert to some extent, and I do enjoy working with people, and I do enjoy working with people within my community. So that's one of the main reasons why I love my work, but also to be able to work in such a beautiful space at the Black Creek Community Farm, I think is also pretty cool. In terms of what inspires me, to be honest, I have to say it's all the racialized Black women in Jane and Finch who have been working alongside them for a very long time. They are what inspires me to really do this work and to really push me forward and to grow and learn in this work that I do. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheyenne, I wanted to ask you next. So can you tell us more about our work, what you love most about it, and what inspires you to continue doing it?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Cheyenne Sundance. I run a year-round urban farm called Sundance Harvest, located in Toronto. It's a really cool farm. I've always wanted to have a farm that is reflected in the ways that I see a resilient food system. So Sundance Harvest sells produce at farmers market and also a small CSA. But alongside with that, what I do is I actually have side projects that are focused toward Black Indigenous liberation in agriculture. So I run a side project with Sundance Harvest called Growing in the Margins. And what this is a totally free education program, both drop-in and mentorship for youth who are BIPOC, queer, trans, two-spirit, femfolk, and people with disabilities. And really, I haven't ever seen myself reflected in agriculture. I've never really seen myself in roles of leadership. So I really wanted to make sure that the way I was running Sundance Harvest was transparent, but I also offered education because education is something that was sorely missed for me when I wanted to start my farm. So that's a bit about Sundance Harvest and what I do.
And what continues to inspire you to do the work?
Yeah, great. So I would say to see it's actually happening. So when we're looking at histories of land and food revolutionary movements led by Black femmes, whether that be Fannie Lou Hamer in the 1960s with her Freedom Farm, or even currently right now with Soulfire Farm, learning and helping youth engage and start their own movements. I feel like the long histories of Black femmes revolutionizing the food landscape has always brought me such happiness and joy.
Amazing, and great to have you here today. And Dee, I wanted to ask you next the same question. So can you share more about the work you do? Tell us why you love it and what inspires you to continue.
Okay, so my name is Dee Woods, and I'm a food and farming actionist and campaigner for good food for all. So my work meets at the nexus of hunger and poverty, human rights, food sovereignty, community development, policy, research, climate, and social justice. So I wear a lot of different hats, but I think what I enjoy most about my work is the on-the-ground frontline work that I do with Granville Community Kitchen and with other organizations, helping people to find agency and, you know, cooking and sharing food and creating community and building community. I think what inspires me, you know, our young people. We just have a generation of young people who are just so clued on, who are just at it. And, you know, I have all the time and energy for young people, but I also am inspired by ancestors, all those who have passed and who have done work, some of that work never recognized. So I always honor my ancestors as well. I'm inspired by them.
Amazing. And Dee, so you do refer to yourself as a good food actionist. That is a term that's new to me, and I was wondering if you could explain that a bit more and how that does relate to Black food sovereignty.
For me, you know, being an actionist is about constructive action within the sphere of food politics. Through advocacy, speaking, writing, networking. And as I described before, you know, it's also that constructive action on the ground, doing the work of good food, creating change by doing change. So, you know, it's co-creating that food access with other people. For me, that's underpinned with values of empathy and respect for myself and others. You know, it is a liberation practice of popular education, sharing knowledge, raising awareness, and facilitating self-directed learning and research, plus my own reflective practice and constant development. So in relation to sort of Black food sovereignty, it is about centering us, you know, the most marginalized and disaffected, to challenge not only those structures, but seeking the abolition of those structural inequalities, oppressions, and violence. You know, it is about dismantling racism, capitalism, white supremacy, whilst also healing our historical and present traumas. It is also about us as Black people, you know, reclaiming and claiming our space, you know, forging spaces of divergence, disruption, where we're already making radical change and moving forward into new and uncharted territory. But most of all, you know, at the core for me is love, joy, and alignment and manifestation of what our ancestors and elders fought for. So it is radical food justice, it is racial justice, it is climate justice, it is ecological justice, it is gender justice, economic justice, disability justice, it is decolonial, it is anti-racist, it is queer, non-binary and trans, it is intersectionality, it is self-determination, it is democracy, and it is liberation.
Thank you, Dee, and thank you for highlighting all those intersections because they do intersect and these systems don't exist alone. And you did highlight some of the challenges and struggles for Black women in food. And I wanted to open this up to the panel. So what are some of the other struggles for Black food sovereignty? So Dee did speak on some, but if you did want to share some other ones that you've experienced or that you see for Black food sovereignty. I can start with Leticia.
Rosie, can you repeat the question for me, please?
So Dee did talk about some of the challenges when it comes to Black food sovereignty and intersecting all the different systems that exist. So what are some of the other struggles in achieving Black food sovereignty? And it'd be great maybe if you can share your experience with working at Black Creek Community Farm and North Toronto.
Yeah, there are so many that I can also draw from my own sort of personal experiences as well, being a Black woman. When I started sort of this work, being a Black young woman in a field that is very dominated by whites, by white women, and also by white men as well. I can give you a very clear description of where a meeting was set here at the farm for me to meet with a group of people that are doing a similar sort of farm work, and they were coming here for consultation. Of course, me being always super friendly, I offered coffee, tea, just things to get people kind of situated. I did introduce myself, and then at the end I was asked to go and call up the director of the farm for the meeting. So it's sort of some of these challenges that to be Black, to be a woman in this sort of field of work. And I think most importantly, for someone who also comes from a low-income community like Jane and Finch, is just being taken seriously, being respected for the knowledge and the skill set that you have, that you bring to the table. I don't come from academic background. I come from the streets of Jane and Finch. This is where I organize based on the issues that impact in my community. And in terms of doing this particular work, there's been multiple challenges that we as a community we face in sort of doing this work. In terms of the intersectionality or how the issues intersect with Black food sovereignty, and in the work that we're doing here and elsewhere and around Black food sovereignty, is around the fact that there's a lot of agencies and organizations parachute into low-income, racialized communities to do this work, to extract resources or to gain resources on the back of community members. So for us at the farm, one of the ways that our work connects very much with the push for Black food sovereignty is just that physical space, to be able to have a physical space that community members can have and can also reimagine what food sovereignty looked like for that community, and for it to be led from top to bottom by community members, I think is pretty important. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll answer that question because it's economics. For so many, what's missing in our food system, Black people, is the economic power. Here in the United States, the income and wealth inequality is tremendous. And so as we move forward in food and farming, we have to look at the economic power that we need to have when it comes to sovereignty. And that means not the capitalistic system which extract, but looking at the social capital and communal wealth that we have within our communities. And so here in the United States, and particularly in New York State, we're starting a Black Farmer Fund. The Black Farmer Fund, number one, is to educate our community about what does wealth mean? What does economic power mean? We take all our money and go outside of our community to buy things, and we never look at the brown and Black businesses that are in our community to put our communities in within our communities. We don't look about the cost and value of our food as Black people. And so trying to educate our community to understand the wealth that they have right within their community instead of always going out. That's number one. Understanding what does it mean to invest, not in terms of monetary investment, but in community investment, community within our community. Back in the day, we did bartering, we did susu. We relied so much on our community in terms of wealth. And so if we're going to move forward, along with food sovereignty and land sovereignty, there has to be economic sovereignty in a way that people understand that the power that we have, the economic we have collectively to move mountains, to make sure at the end of the day that we continue to build communal wealth and social change.
Thank you. Those are excellent points. And I did want to ask Cheyenne if you did want to add anything to that.
Add to the question that I just asked?
Yeah, so around some of the challenges, and I can provide more context. So I was able to review some of your videos, and you talked a lot about experiencing a lot of the isms. So whether it's racism, sexism, or ageism as a challenge to food sovereignty. So did you want to speak more to those challenges and sort of how you're able to maneuver those?
Yeah, so when I started in the Sundance Harvest, I remember distinctively an event I went to, kind of an urban agriculture event, and I was talking about Sundance Harvest and my idea, and this was like 2 years ago, so I was like 21, I'm 23 now. And a lot of people told me I should be patient, I should wait, I should get a mentor, why don't I join their forum, why don't I just work at a nonprofit in Toronto? And they kept telling me to do these things, but they kept forgetting that young people, and this is maybe with anyone across their age, have a passion that isn't burnt out yet from the rejection, from being told not to do something. And I feel like that lively passion and that daydreaming sense that I had really is what made Sundance Harvest happen. And I think that's a very important thing. So I didn't listen to anyone because I'm very stubborn. And I said, I'm just going to start Sundance Harvest. So I did. But it was very hard because I could not find a farm that was doing what I was doing. And not to say that Sundance Harvest was the first one. It's probably because I had a limited resources. I didn't have the money to travel and explore, didn't have the money to go around the world and see different farms. I also didn't really have any income to buy a lot of books. So what I had to do was make do what was at the library and also the people I was talking to. So the barriers I faced were barriers that were often common to a lot of Black women getting into farming, but also there was two main barriers, which is land and learning. Land and learning are the two most important things for Black femmes to get into food sovereignty work. Land obviously is very hard to get and it's very expensive, and also understanding the Indigenous concept and the notion that land back needs to happen because it does need to happen in Canada, which is a settler state, really made me think about my relationship to land and what it looks like as a treaty person too. So for land itself, I had a really hard time finding places to grow food. In Toronto, there's really hardly any green space and a really lack of urban agriculture. Like urban agriculture planning and protocol, and we don't really have a lot of policies here supporting urban agriculture. So I ended up just getting a greenhouse and leasing that, which was an added cost and made my first year pretty hard, but I went through it. But for the learning piece, as a Black woman learning to grow how to grow food, it was very, very hard. I mainly learned through books and self-taught. I spent some time in Cuba when I was 18 on a socialist farm where I learned about livestock, about cabasa root and tobacco, but I did not know anything about Toronto's winter climate. So when I learned about farming in the winter, that was something that really got me. But I do feel like learning is something that needs to be provided more on a sliding scale, or even free if it's subsidized by nonprofits. And by learning, I don't mean this is a container growing workshop. I do mean this is how you drive a tractor. This is how you turn over a bed. This is how you make compost. These hard skills that people can use for their resumes if they want to work at a farm, or if a Black femme's like, I can't find any farm I want, so I will create the template. We need learning and land to actually create these farms to therefore create our own Black food sovereignty.
Thank you. And it does speak to what Karen was saying about the economic justice piece as well. Karen, I did want to ask you a question. You've been quoted saying that to grow your own food gives you power and dignity. Can you talk a little bit about the role that growing food plays in determining our own future as Black people?
I'm glad you asked me this question because I'm 66 years of age, and back in the day, my relationship to food was that it was grown in a supermarket, and my relationship as a Black person is that we were slaves. So coming to age to find out, wait a second, folks, the reason why in the United States we were brought here was not because we were strong and dumb. We were brought here because of our knowledge of agriculture, seeds in our hair, the low country back in the South, swamping weather conditions. The same in Africa. The colonists could never survive. We have the sickle cell trait to fight off malaria. They couldn't survive. That was taken away from me. That history of coming here with season of inventing crop rotation, irrigation, all the tools that you see now, that was taken away from me. And so once I was able to get that right education of my place and my sense of belonging, then I knew the power of food meant so much. And these days, food has been used as a weapon against Black people. In the United States, we have three things that are really killing us: type 2 diabetes, hypertension, obesity, subsidized food, and cheap food is killing our system, killing our people. And so as a result, when I say how food is powerful, we have to start getting back to our relationship to food. That's number one. The fact that we were the ones that were growing food, that our history is agrarian people. I tell people, look at the color of our skin. The color of our skin is soil. And so when you start educating people around that powerful narrative on why we were here, then you understand why growing food is so powerful and why you see young people wanting to go back to the land and wanting to grow food because it's in our DNA.
Thank you for that. And I think that's so important, especially when you speak to our heritage, our culture. And I want to open this up to the panel, and maybe Karen, you can start off. What would you say to youth that maybe are hesitant to pursue a career in farming, or don't feel like they have the support of their family or their communities, or they don't feel like this is something to be proud of? What would you say to them?
I tell you, take out your Samsung Galaxies and your iPhones and go to grandma, grandpa, abuela, abuelo, who farmed, and get that story and get that narrative, because they can tell you they never went to a grocery store, that they were more healthier they were now back then than they are now, and get that narrative of the history about growing food. They will tell you how it was. And I think for me as an elder, to put that into the youth idea, capture that story, because the story in history is your legacy to the land.
Thank you. Dee, I wanted to ask you the same thing. What would you say to youth that maybe are hesitant or they don't feel like this is something to be proud of? What would you say to them?
I think first in the UK, we don't necessarily have that long tradition of the land in the UK. You know, we're disconnected. We have this great sense of unbelonging, but what's happening in the last few years is that people really want to be reconnected with land, because we recognize that as our place of belonging. And it is about, as Karen said, you know, collecting those narratives, speaking to those elders who do have that experience of growing on land, of producing their own food. Even if it was somewhere else, it is still applicable. And it is about, you know, collective. For me, it is always about collective action. So cooperative farms, you know, collective ownership of land. I think, you know, if we try to access land by ourselves, we're up against it, because most land, you know, 98% of our land is owned by, you know, I think about 3% of the population. So it has to be collective. And yeah, young people just need to go for it. People who want to do it just need to go for it.
Thank you for that. Leticia, did you want to speak to that as well? What would you say to youth? And I know the farm does a lot of youth programming to engage young people, but those who maybe are hesitant or don't have the support or finding it difficult to embrace farming as something to be proud of.
Yeah, I think it's also been, I agree with everything that Karen and Dee also mentioned. And I think it's also laying out and being realistic about the challenges that they are going to face as well in terms of this particular work. You have some young folks that want to get into farming, but their family members are like, it doesn't pay. Again, because our history, and to bring in the piece around migrant farm workers, right? If all we are told and all we know and understand about farming is through enslavement or through the exploitation of our bodies, it's very difficult when you're having a conversation with a young person when there isn't that many role models per se to kind of for them to look up to. But I think one key example is look at Cheyenne. It's like you didn't have to say anything to her. It's like, this is what I want to do and I'm going to do it regardless of what you say. And I think, like Dee mentioned, you know, you step, you get involved and you get in and you start and you try to see who can support you to kind of do this work, and you do that work, acknowledging that there's going to be challenges down the road, but also noting that, you know, there's the end reward that is most important. I myself, the first time I grew a zucchini, I was like, my mind was blown. And it gave me a huge boost of self-esteem. I didn't even know where it came from just growing a zucchini plant for the first time. And I'm not a farmer. So I think the rewards, other than the monetary piece, the rewards are very enriching and also very lasting as well in terms of what it means for generations and generations of other young people and Black folks that want to do this work.
Thank you. And Cheyenne, I wanted to ask you the same thing. If you could share, what would you say to other young people who are hesitant or, you know, just trying to find meaning and to be proud of this?
Yeah, I would say firstly, hello, fellow youth. I'm 23, so I got a lot of youth emails and Instagram DMs because they prefer Instagram, I'm noticing. There's two things that I would say. The first thing is, if you're hesitant to get a career in farming, working at a farm that does not represent you at all will make it even more hesitant for you. You should be working at, ideally not unpaid internships because they're unethical. You deserve to be paid for your labor. Working at a farm, visiting a farm, or hanging out on a farm that is run by a fellow Black person, a Black femme, Black queer, trans, two-spirit person, really getting into those intersectionalities, having that experience and talking to them will far surmount working on a white farming wealth that grows organic strawberries. Because is that really what you're going to be? Probably not. Maybe you want to have a farm that's devoted to food justice, intersectional justice, or something like that. So you want to make sure that you visit farms if you can, or talk to farmers, even if it's over Instagram, that have similar experiences to you, because they will give you the actual advice you'll need. Reading a book on organic agriculture is okay, but really, who is that book for? It's for white men and women, white people with power and class privilege that own land and have this resource that a lot of Black youth don't have. So it's very important to understand where are you getting your resources from, whether that be like knowledge, learning, or just verbal learning. And then the second thing I would say to youth who are hesitant to get into it, Karen, Leticia, and Dee both mentioned amazing points about families and ancestral ties to farming and that kind of taboo around farming. What I would say is just go for it. I personally didn't listen to my family because I'm very stubborn, but also most of my family didn't really understand why I wanted to farm, but I knew it was a viable career. And I'm a full-time farmer. I have been for about a year and a half now, and I make an income that supports me and pays my rent. So you can do it. You just have to make sure that, like I said, you are following people who have the same lived experiences as you, because it will be harder. I'm not going to say farming is easy. Farming in general is really hard, but really it's hard work, and it's going to be even harder because of the color of your skin or your gender identity or anything like that too. So I would say understand that it is a viable career. It doesn't have to be a hobby. You can have a lifelong farming career like I do, or I'm starting to do. And then secondly, representation matters.
Thank you. And I remember the first time I went to Black Creek Community Farm, just seeing like food actually be grown and seeing that people working there look like you really makes a difference. So I do definitely agree with all of that. So I wanted to ask another question. So what are some of the unique barriers? So you talked a lot about the barriers to food sovereignty, but some of the unique barriers faced by Black women trying to advance food sovereignty. And how do you feel like these can be addressed and dismantled? And I wanted to start off with Dee for this question.
For me, I think as Black women, we are rendered invisible. No matter how hard we work, no matter how many tables we sit at, or how, advanced we get in our knowledge, in academia or wherever else, our work is not recognized. And it's often seen as our duty, because we're women and we're Black women, and our role is to feed Will and feed our families and feed our communities. And even though we are these repositories of knowledge, on seeds and plants and biodiversity, even though we're holding our communities together, and, that we're at the forefront of struggles for our just and equitable food systems, we are made invisible. And so for me, it'll always come back to power. It'll always come back to race. It'll always come back to patriarchy. And to make ourselves visible, we just need to challenge these deeply embedded gender norms. We need to build our power, as Karen said, we need to build our power, economically and otherwise, value our wealth, imagine and co-create those alternatives. And not only show up and demand to be seated at those tables, but start setting our own tables. And I'm turning up with my cast iron pan and my fried plantain, eating our food.
Thank you. Karen, did you want to answer that as well?
Yeah, so for so many years, we've been trying to find our place here as Black women. But let me tell y'all folks, globally, who controls agriculture are women. How do we allow a handful of white men to control the food system throughout the world? Hello, it's time to wake back and take back our narrative and take back our power. For too long, people have making money on the backs of us. We are women. We control agriculture. But for years, they have denied us resources and technology. Now, folks, our eyes are wide open. And we know in order for us, like Dee said, we have to work together to change that narrative, to gain control of our resources within ourselves, and also the technology so that we can move forward and make sure that when we grow our food, the food is benefiting our community, our bodies, and not, again, that extractive element that always comes in when it comes to capitalism and making sure that our wealth is always taken out of our community. Those days are over. It's a new day. Welcome to the revolution.
Thank you. And I remember when I started educating myself and learning that women were the growers, were the farmers, I was just so surprised, because when you think of a farmer or the image that has been portrayed to us, what do you think of? It's not that. So yeah, I agree. We need to, continue to do this and take up space and, take back that narrative. So I agree with you there for sure. Leticia, can you answer that as well? So what are some of the unique barriers faced by Black women, in particular, who are trying to advance food sovereignty, and how do we address them and work to dismantle them?
Yeah, I think Dee named most of them around patriarchy, racism, classism, and how all those play a key role. But I also wanted to add around because of all these things that sort of stuck against Black women, for the most part, we end up, it's sort of this superwoman syndrome, or whatever you want to call it. It's like we have an added pressure to prove ourselves, to do 10 times more work, harder work, to prove that we can do this work. So I think that's like one of the main barriers, and it has a huge impact in terms of our mental health as well, and also on our family's health as well. And I think that's a huge barrier, because clearly we can't do this work if we are already broken down, when we've been broken down, because we are taking it from all fronts, right? As Black women, especially if you're Black and you're queer, or you are, you know, it's all that pressure and scrutiny and criticism that also makes, I think, the work also that much harder, which are all very much seeped in patriarchy, seeped in racism, and seeped in classism. Like Karen mentioned, like women globally, right? We are the ones that are feeding communities. We are the ones doing that work, but we do not own the land that we're growing those foods on. And that's a huge piece around capitalism and the extraction. And then to make it worse, then our communities have to deal with mining companies that are from the West, that are going into these communities and really destroying the land that people are trying to use to feed themselves. So I think that's sort of the pieces, and honestly, to highlight the classism piece, and because we have to have class analysis in these conversations that we are having around who have access to what and who doesn't. So thank you.
Thank you. Cheyenne, I wanted to ask you as well. So can you describe some of the unique barriers of Black women in particular, and how do we address them and dismantle them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I really appreciate what Leticia said about the Black woman, superwoman syndrome. It's also called like the warrior Black woman syndrome, right? Oftentimes I get DMs very regularly about, oh, Cheyenne, you're doing so much. It's so great that you're running all these projects. Oh, I'm so happy. And it's often white people who are sending me these messages. And what I say back is, well, who else is going to do it? That's all it is, I have to say, because really, have their communities been showing up and being allies? No. Have they been giving land back to Indigenous people? No. So really, unless Black women are doing things, I find that not a lot gets done, to be quite frank. And this can even be traced back to other great movements. For example, the Stonewall riots, Marsha P. Johnson, spearheading that movement, right? Getting things done. And it's Pride Month, so I wanted to mention that. But I feel like for Black women in food sovereignty and that work, feminized labor is in general deemed invaluable. And feminized labor is childcare. It is growing food, like Dee, Karen, and Leticia all mentioned. But it is also community organizing. So who is organizing community around creating urban farms? Who is actually pushing toward more community gardens and allotment gardens? It's often those who are most affected systemically by food insecurity. It's people who actually need these things. You don't have homeowners living in Hyde Park saying to their MPP, I want more community gardens for Black people. It's oftentimes Black women who are like, I need to grow food for my family, my community, so I'm going to be pushed to do this. And being pushed and pushed to do community organizing, childcare, all these extra things isn't because we're like a superwoman. In my opinion, I think we are, but it's because there's no other choice. And unless allies start becoming accomplices and step up and actually take this extra labor off of our backs, then we're going to see some amazing Black femme organizers burn out. And then that work won't be carried on. They may be too tired, honestly, to teach the next generation. So for Black sovereignty to exist, we need Black femmes to be respected, dignified, and heard. And I would say to address these issues and to address these unique barriers for Black women, what we need to do is to stop thinking about being a part of the food system and start thinking about creating our own. And that's strictly what I think. I'm buying a farm in less than a year because I cannot work within this current food system. I want to start cooperatives. I want to start a land trust. I don't believe in these capitalistic means to actually acquiring land and obtaining land and who gets that land. And I just personally think that these unique barriers exist within a white supremacist capitalist system. So as long as we're still in that system, it won't change, because the oppressors will never give us the key to unlock unoppression. They'll never say, here you go, you're free. No, they benefit too much from our oppression. So unless we create our own systems, we're going to be stuck asking for that key that maybe we'll never get.
Thank you all for highlighting such important barriers and ways to address them. And there was a theme that came up that I wanted to bring up, where we talked about health, mental health, and just health overall. And personally, so I do have a health background. I am a dietitian, and I got into that work from my own personal experience of being food insecure. Karen, specifically, I know you often talk about and discuss food as it relates to health, and the idea of a food apartheid, food and food desert. So why do you think it's important to make those connections when we're discussing access to food as well as health equity? And I'll open this up to the other panelists as well.
Well, my profession was a physical therapist, so I saw within my patient, my Black and brown patient, the relationship between food and health and how they were getting diet-related diseases, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, obesity. And it was based on my pyramid system, which is fast food, junk food, and processed food. And so for me, I felt it was really, really so important to really talk about food in a way to bring up some of the challenges that food had in my neighborhood in the Bronx, which is a low-income neighborhood. Because for so long, people have been designating this outside term of food deserts. And it's like, I had to call my homies and says, wait a second, we live in a desert? We have food deserts? I had to call my friends in Oakland and in Chicago and Philly. And it's like, the people in the desert has food. And so I had to change that term. And I said, no, it's food apartheid. And this is why, because when you talk about in that frame, you're bringing to the surface the problem that food has along race, demographics, and wealth. And now we can sit down, roll up our sleeves and start talking about what the main problem is in our food system. Our food system is a subsidized, cheap food system where all that cheap energy and food is placed into low-income neighborhoods. And people act like they don't know. In the United States, one of the richest countries, 40 million people are in poverty. 40 million people. Why is that? It's because we have a food system that's controlled by, like I said, a handful of people that are controlling our food system in such a way that there's no cost or value in our food, except that cheap and subsidized food are going into Black and brown neighborhoods. And so for me, the health issue is right there. You want us to be healthy? Then you know what? Change the food system so that we can have healthy food options. It's not that we don't have food, but we don't have a healthy food options. And also, let's talk about the elitist that food has become. When you say organics, we've been growing food without chemicals for years. So it's time to get the organics out and let people start growing the food that are indigenous and our ancestors knew how to grow the food, so that we can start feeding our own people.
Did anyone else want to speak on that as well? On the piece around health or mental health?
I think I can touch on it. And this is also one of the reasons why I embrace the term food apartheid too, is because when you look at, if you look at a neighborhood like Rosedale in Toronto, and then you look at a neighborhood like Jane and Finch, at every corner of the intersection, you're going to find fast food restaurants. The study that came out about a decade ago, I'm sure there hasn't been any changes now, that found that Jane Finch community actually pays more for fresh produce, including milk, in comparison to other neighborhoods, right? If you look at the health outcomes of the community, of the Jane and Finch community, that is a high immigrant community, highly racialized Black community, the fact that there's high rates of diabetes, high rates of high blood pressure, there's all of this, and then you compare that to a community like Rosedale, right? They don't have the same health outcomes, and they don't have the same access to food. It's really clear that there is this apartheid, right? That's created too when you think about food as well. And it's very, very important to highlight that in terms of how it has that physical and mental impact. If you're talking to some of the aunties in our community and they're telling you that I'm choosing between my medications or food, right? That's literally the life choices that people are having to make, or whether this month can we afford to pay that rent and risk, you know, the landlord taking us to the tribunal, or can we afford to buy that extra food? I always say, you know, if you go into the grocery stores, mac and cheese are always on sale, right? All the foods that causes or do not support our physical and mental health are always for sale in our grocery stores. And then you go just 20 minutes away from, you know, a higher end neighborhood, and the type of food that they have that's in the shop is really different. And let's not even like bring in policing. The fact that in racialized low-income communities, you have police, undercover police, and police officers inside the grocery stores. That's not the same experience that other people in higher neighborhoods have. And even to hear the ridiculous excuse that, oh, you know, a criminal lawyer once said to me while I was doing a tour, oh, you know why that is because people are using baby formula to make drugs. So I was like, what kind of drug dealer are you if you can't drive just 10 minutes outside of the community then to get it, because the baby formula is not locked up there, but in our community it is. So then what assumptions are people making about our community, and how does that impact our physical and mental health as well? Thanks.
I would say it's a similar issue and pattern in the UK. And even though that term food desert originated from the UK, you know, a desert implies, you know, something being part of an ecosystem. It is a food apartheid, right? These things are planned, you know, people sit down and make choices about where in the UK we have, you know, what are known as chicken shops. So fast food outlets that proliferate in poor and low income areas. You know, that same lack of access to fresh food, poverty and deeply entrenched poverty through a series of austerity, of policies. People sit down and make these decisions, right, that impact on us as Black people, as Black women, as disabled women, you know, people with long-term health conditions, mental health conditions, right? Black people in the UK, and particularly Black women in the UK, are disproportionately, you know, food insecure. We are going hungry in the UK, right? Even though there's, you know, food being thrown away. And, you know, real horrible thing is this food banking system, this charitable food banking system that the big corporations, big food have co-opted. And they're selling that the solution is more junk food, yeah, and surplus food, right? I wouldn't even call that food. So for us to reclaim our health sovereignty, we need to control our food sovereignty. Right? And that's right through from growing it to processing it to cooking it to selling it. We need to control our entire food system.
Agreed. Cheyenne, I don't know if you had anything else to add to that as well.
Yeah, I have a bit to add. Like my first memory with Black women and Black like femmes in particular being having more food insecurity and Black people having more food insecurity came when I was in high school, and a bunch of people I knew were like lifting some stuff from the store. That was a very common thing in my high school. And then when we got back to the high school and people showed the treasures that they lifted, a lot of my friends who were Black femmes, they lifted meat sticks, crackers, cheese, and then the other white kids who were living in the affluent area mainly lifted chocolate bars. And I started seeing this pattern. Why were they lifting these meat sticks, these cheese, these crackers? And I spoke to my friend, and she said, because that has the most calories. And I will always remember when she said that to me. And I'm guessing that her sister taught her that, her mother taught her that, to eat more calorie-rich food, So I think about that, and I think about how Black femmes in particular do feminized labor that is undervalued, it's constantly undervalued. And also in our food system, we go hungry. And I do think about the community organizing regarding food growing gardens or urban farms done by Black femmes all across the world. And I think about it in a positive light, but I also think about it in a very sad light, that this is the reaction that we have to take into our own hands to make sure we have our own food sovereignty. Like the public officials, the urban planners who plan these apartheids, like both Leticia, Dee, and Karen said, it's done on purpose. It doesn't magically happen that there's no healthy food stores or green grocers. And as a result and as a response, mainly Black femmes have to organize within our communities to get justice. So I look at it with excitement to see urban agriculture spring up by Black femmes, but also sadness and disappointment on the fact of city councilors, public policy planners, and overall white oppression. And I think about how can we create dignified conditions for Black femmes to grow food, and one that isn't a response to scarcity. I'm very curious and excited to see the day where Black farms can open up that aren't a response to food insecurity, but are a response to sustainable sovereignty and people just genuinely wanting to grow food. I feel like that day will be really exciting to see. And that's really all I have to say on that.
Thank you. And you've all really highlighted the importance of Black food sovereignty and why we need this. And for all those people who are hesitant here, like, look at these reasons why we need this. So I wanted to ask the next question. So how does working towards Black food sovereignty benefit everyone, not just Black folks in Black communities? Cheyenne, did you want to start with that?
Sure. So working toward Black food sovereignty. So when we're thinking about food in general, everyone needs food. Everyone, whoever you are, at one point has an agrarian past, has a past of growing food. This is maybe before colonization and the industrialized revolution of agriculture. So Black food sovereignty itself helps everyone because it does create more farms. And there's so much data, there's so much reports, and so much verbal stories told about how Black people disproportionately face like the highest rates of food insecurity in the food system in Canada, where I'm at. And to ignore these is to be naive, but it also is to be complacent within the system. So I would say that having Black food sovereignty helps everyone because it actually addresses these underlying issues. Food itself and insecurity to food and having a lack of food isn't caused by the food itself. It's caused by a lack of income right now. And because people have a lack of income, this could come from Black people being hyper-policed and criminalized for things that white people are not criminalized, and then they have a record and it's hard to get a job. It could also be housing crises and gentrification in Black neighborhoods. The unaffordable housing market in Toronto is wild. It could also be a bunch of other things that affect Black people's income, like where they can get a job, schools they can go to, and things like that too. So I would say that once people start noticing that you can give Black people all the food banks you want, that still won't change food insecurity if they still can't buy food that they want and buy dignified food for themselves. But I would say, though, that it helps everyone because it does address these core issues. These underlying issues, housing insecurity and things like that as well, they affect more people than just Black folk. But to solve Black food sovereignty, you have to still solve those underlying issues. So I guess that's what I would say, yeah.
Right, and you're great at making those connections because it doesn't exist on its own. When we discuss food, so many systems are at play there. Leticia, I want to ask you the same question. How does working towards Black food sovereignty benefit everyone?
I kind of look at this questions from two angles. One, in my head, I'm like, Black food sovereignty isn't going to benefit everyone, if the main focus of our food system is about exploitation of people, right? And is based on capitalism. So really, if you are a white capitalist who really need to exploit the system so that you could buy more and more private jets, Black food sovereignty isn't going to benefit you in that way. But to add to what Cheyenne said around how it benefits, I'm just thinking back to, I grew up in a village in Ghana called Pipiasi. I grew up with my grandmother, actually, and my grandmother was a small scale grower. The food that she grew And as kids, we will go to school and we'll have to go and meet my grandmother at the farm, and we have to carry back on our heads whatever harvest we have for the day. If there's no harvest, you have to bring wood, whatever that you never go to the forest, to the farm, and come home empty. But what my grandmother, one of the things that I didn't know as a child until when I grew up is when I started realizing and sort of connecting the dots was the food that she grew, she bought her. So she would share seeds with other growers. She will go to another village that was a fishing village, and we would trade for fish. And she will prepare food, and she will share that food with other people in the community. She will sell part of it. And sometimes people didn't have money, so they will come and they will, they will say, hey, I'll pay you, or maybe I can weed your land for you in return for some of that food. This is not to romanticize small-scale agriculture in any way, but it's to sort of look at how communities were able to take care of themselves by having that, one, the access to the land, the ability to be able to grow, the ability to also control their own seeds and to share seeds among themselves. And they were able to do that. Yes, they were not rich. It was not based on a monetary value, but they were able to at least, and you would speak to a lot of people who grew up in the village years ago, they'll tell you, yeah, we had food. Now the opposite is they don't have food. If you need some of the huge staple items, you have to buy it outside of the village before you come in. Because of deforestation, because of mining, because of the extraction, so much of the extraction that has happened in that community. So I think that's just to kind of give you an idea of how does Black food sovereignty benefit everyone. In that community, having that control to now where they don't have control over their seeds, to now where they don't have control over the lands because a lot of the lands have been taken over, it makes it really difficult for the community to be able to take care of themselves. Thanks.
Karen, did you want to answer that question as well? How does Black food sovereignty benefit everyone?
I don't know, it's mixed feeling because, Black food sovereignty may be dangerous to some people because all of a sudden we gain back our power. And so, people are afraid of power dynamics, so I'm going to try to look at it within the Black community because, first of all, we look at Black sovereignty is that we have to have access to land, access to capital, and access to power. And I tell people time and time again, look at our people. If we weren't ill, if we had resources, I tell people, give us three things: opportunity, land, and resources, and people who you once deemed powerless become powerful. And that's scary, y'all. You know what I'm saying? So are y'all ready for Black sovereignty to open up so that it benefits everybody? Then you have to have an open mind and look at a power shift dynamic that has to happen. And if you're ready for that power shift, then Black sovereignty will benefit everybody. But if not, then there's going to be some problem. There's going to be some pushback because, again, we have to have a society that is capable to understanding that in order for Black sovereignty to exist, that means somebody's going to have to give us some power. And are y'all ready to do that? So some white folk got to give us some power, and are they ready to do that? I'll leave it at that.
Dee, I wanted to ask you the same thing.
Yeah, thoroughly agree with what everyone else has said. And for me, Black food sovereignty is not about separatism, but it is about prioritizing us. And when we are at that point where we want to shift power, where we want to dismantle things, it has to be about solidarity with other social movements. All right, so it's not just our food movement. It's not just, Black food movements. It would be housing movements. It would be poverty movements. It would be hunger movements. All right, it is all about that collective action, transformation, and power. Because, we're not an island. So when we have that mass shift from the bottom up, things will change and everyone can benefit from Black food sovereignty.
Thank you. And what I'm hearing is the need for a power distribution and more resources. This leads me to my next question. So white folks lead and occupy leadership positions in so many of the spaces, resources for change making, especially the most well-resourced ones. What could white leaders be doing to help advance Black food sovereignty? And are you seeing that happen anywhere? I'm going to start with Karen for this question.
Let us start with me because let me tell you something. They need to get out of the way. It's time for white people to get out of the way, especially if you have been in nonprofit organizations for 10, 15 years in whites in Black communities and Black spaces. When you gonna retire? It's time for you to get out of the way and go with your mission and vision to make sure that there's leadership, you're building leadership. That's number one. Right now, Black Lives Matter in the US is on fire. We're getting so many, all of a sudden, Black Lives Matter in food and policing, all of a sudden we matter. What happened 400 years, we ain't matter, but now we matter. And so now what you see in the US, everybody wants to donate and do this and do that. The bottom line that inclusion and diversity means nothing if we don't have the power to make decisions and to make change. And so you can put all the money in. That's all we want. Your money. Come Rise and Root, Black Farm Fund. Give us the money. We want the money, but we also want the power, and that power comes with shifting. You got to give it up. Three things: either you're going to give it up, you're going to change, or we're going to take it away. Those are the three things you got to do. And now is the time for you to do reflection. Reflection in your business, in your organization. It's time to give up the reins and shift it to the hands of the people in the community that have leadership. We don't need no more leadership. You know what I'm saying? We don't need to be taught. We know what to do. Give it up, move out the way. And you know what I tell white people, my white allies? Go into your neighborhoods, your white neighborhoods, and start talking about the conversation about race and wealth instead of asking us to try to fix things. We're not fixing anything anymore. The ball is in your court, in your neighborhoods, and you need to have those hard conversations within white communities about what race means, about what wealth means, about what poverty means, about hunger means. The day is over. We're through. We're no longer educating. You got to go into your community and start educating yourselves.
Cheyenne, did you want to speak to that question? What are white folks lead and occupy many positions of power? What can white leaders be doing to advance Black food sovereignty? And are you seeing this happen anywhere?
Yeah, so what they need to do is they need to leave their positions of power and give the resources to Black femmes. That's strictly what I want to happen, and I think that should happen. But what I would say is, so when we already know all these facts and we see data and we hear time and time again about the oppression that Black people face in the food system, why aren't we leading the food system as Black people? And to quote Audre Lorde, who's an amazing Black poet and scholar, love her, she said, "You cannot dismantle the master's house with the master's tools." So why are we relying on white people to lead the movement for food justice when they aren't the ones with the answers? They only have the master's tools and therefore are the master's oppression. That's how I feel. And I do think that until white people, like and the amazing Karen said, give up that power, that nothing really will change. And to dismantle the master's house in this case, and when we're talking about the oppression in the food system, those keys to dismantle that house come from lived experience, community organizing, political resistance work, ancestral food and land sovereignty, a relationship with the land and all of her inhabitants. And these are the tools that Black people already hold. So we have the key to a resilient food system, and that key often comes from being the person who's oppressed in an unresilient food system. We don't need to be the urban agriculture coordinators. I've already done that, don't like it. We don't need to be volunteer coordinators, admin assistants, very low levels in nonprofits. We don't need all of that. We already know how to serve community. We already have been. And unless a nonprofit or even an urban farm that is for profit is led by Black people, Indigenous people, then they're really not doing anything. And if anything, they're doing harm, because they're taking away grant funding and profits from Black and Indigenous people that can actually use that money and create their own sovereignty. So I truly think that, I haven't seen it much. I think that FoodShare is an amazing example of Black leadership, considering how many jobs and positions that Black people have within power. But unless we can actually change the system and we have those tools, then nothing will change. So I feel for white people, what they should do is talk amongst your job. If you're in a position of a higher power, then you should be saying, okay, I should leave, and how will my transition put a Black femme in my place? Because it's about time, and I feel like as many Black youth programs you want to create, as many community gardens you want to have in Black neighborhoods, as many youth gardens you want to go into Black neighborhoods and have a white facilitator teach youth how about growing carrots and not callaloo, that doesn't do anything. That just harms us, and that just stretches out the long and painful journey for our own sovereignty. I would say give us the resources and quit your jobs.
Thank you. Leticia, anything to add to that?
Yeah, just to add to that, I think one of the things I'm thinking about is also, we talk a lot about the aging, the farmers in Canada are aging, and that, we need a lot of young people to get into farming. I think if you are a white farmer that is looking at succession planning for your farm, instead of always going for the usual suspect, another young white family that can sort of take over your farm, I think it's important that you look to Black, Indigenous, racialized folks and actually give those farms to them so that they're able to use those farms to be able to grow their own food and to also start their own farming business. I think that's really, really important. I agree with everything that everyone had mentioned. And I think that's like one concrete way, especially if there are folks on here who are farmers, who have farms, who have access to land. One way is also making sure that that land can land in the hands of Black people or and Indigenous people. Thanks.
Thank you. And Dee, I wanted to ask you the same thing. How can white leaders advance Black food sovereignty? And are you seeing this happen anywhere?
Tiny shift, because in the UK, we don't really talk about race. As Black people, as people of color, yes, we talk about it, all right? But for most white people, they don't. And we need to start having those conversations. I'm with Karen, I'm not educating anyone, all right? Everything is out there for you to learn. The UK has to do a lot of soul searching around its role in sort of creating racism as well, and perpetuating, capitalism. So for me, it is about reparations, right? That redistribution of land and resources, and not just for us here in the UK, right? But for the diaspora. Yeah, because the UK went to virtually every country in the world and effed it up. Yeah? Time for the UK to start paying back. All right? I'm sorry, I don't accept those apologies for slavery and whatever else. No. Put your money where your mouth is, put your land where your mouth is.
Yes, thank you all for that. So there's things to be done here, definitely. Thank you for sharing that. And I did want to ask this too. So thinking of people who are not necessarily in leadership positions, and both white folks and non-Black people of color, what can they do to support Black food sovereignty? I'll start with Cheyenne for this question.
Cool. So for white people and non-Black people who don't maybe have positions of power, if, for example, you work at a nonprofit that deals with food, whether that be a food bank or even an urban agriculture nonprofit, if you're noticing that there is no prioritization of Black people and our food sovereignty, then what are you going to do about it? What I would suggest is actually opening up that dialogue. Don't ask your Black colleague to do it, because we are tired. Well, I'm tired. I'm speaking for myself. I'm tired and I don't want to do that work. So you should be coming together, talking about race, what you can do, but also kind of riling stuff up. Talk to your ED, ask why they aren't prioritizing Black people and Black lives and Black sovereignty, and really make that rift. Creating that discussion really helps, and your Black colleagues will probably be maybe a bit thankful. And I know I was at one point that I didn't always have to bring up why Black people aren't being prioritized. And other ways that white people and non-Black folks can kind of help the food sovereignty mission and fight, I would say, is supporting Black farms and supporting Black food sovereignty. So it can be as simple as buying produce from Black farms, because those same farms are the avenue for youth who want to learn about agriculture to come to. Like I spoke about earlier in the panel, when youth are learning about agriculture, I always suggest them to visit a farm that is run by someone who they can see themselves in. So unless we're actually buying produce and supporting these Black farms, then there's not going to be really any examples for youth for the next generation to learn from. So you really want to buy our produce and support our work, because even before we get these farms, we need to get access to land and growing space. So that could be as simple as, if you're in the city, let's say you have an abnormally large backyard and you're like, I want to offer this to a grassroots Black urban farm and see how they feel about it. Just moving those resources around helps a lot. I do feel like sharing and tweeting doesn't do much. I'm way more believing in action, whether that be actual reparations, distributing resources such as land, rooftop farms, backyard farms, even rural farming areas, breaking up that land, putting it into a land trust. And then the last one is actually getting on your feet and mobilizing, advocating, lobbying. If you're in positions of power within local government, lobby more for urban agriculture in Black neighborhoods. Maybe we can think about why there isn't actual good park amenities in Black neighborhoods, why there's a lack of green space, why their MPPs aren't actually taking urban agriculture seriously. So I would say those three things are what I recommend non-Black and white people to do, but it goes far beyond sharing an article on Facebook, and it should be action.
Thank you for that. Leticia, I want to ask you the same thing.
So one thing I wanted to add, and I agree with everything Cheyenne just shared, is also around Black food sovereignty. In supporting Black food sovereignty, I think it's also important to support things like the minimum wage campaign. For the farms and different spaces, whether it's led by Black people or other folks, it's important that people do have livable wages. Of course, not $15 an hour, of course, way more. I think in Toronto now you need about $20 an hour in order to survive. I think that's crucial and that's important. The other piece I wanted to mention more in an urban context is around gentrification and speaking out against gentrification, because a lot of Black neighborhoods are being pushed, people are being pushed out of your neighborhoods. And these are also spaces that people could live, people could be growing their food as well, that they're being pushed out of. So I think that's very important to speak out against some of that. The other piece to go back to is the one I mentioned around the land, which Cheyenne mentioned as well. It's very, very important. We are in the city of Toronto. There is a lot of land here in the city of Toronto. And I think it's important, how do we do that work with the city, with the Toronto Region and Conservation Authority, but also on private land? How do we, and I don't know if the term is decommodifying land, so the land is not so expensive that people can't even get access to. I think it's very, very important that if you have access to land, that and there are farmers that are really looking for land, how can they get access to that, and making sure that they can get that ownership. It's not just about leasing the land, because then you're tied to someone. It's about having that full control of that land as well, so that as a community, we can figure out what we want to do with it and have that control over it. And I'm also more for co-ops and collective sort of land ownership as well, because I feel like this is the way that we can build our community versus putting our eggs into one basket and then having the same sort of systems of capitalism replicated itself within our community as well. So how do you do that, and how can people make sure that they're supporting some of these? Because again, we cannot talk about food and food sovereignty without talking about housing, gentrification, job security, without talking about policing as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Karen, did you want to speak to that as well?
So white folks and non-Black people, your complacency and silence has been deafening. It has been killing us. It's time for y'all to speak up. Speak up and speak out. When you see injustices, speak up and speak out. Here in the United States, in particular, I'm focusing on New York State because that's my emphasis. We have 57,000 farmers. Only 139 are Black. So wait a second. And this is what we need to do. We can't talk about a just and equitable food system. We ain't in the food system. We're not in the food system. And so I try to tell, because right now, Black Lives Matter, everybody jumping on the bandwagon. I tell my white allies who own businesses, nonprofits, speak up and speak out. That's an injustice. Speak out for policy change. Why is it? Why is there 39 Black farmers in New York State out of 57,000? Something's wrong with that. We have been shouting out for years. It's time for white folks to speak up to when you see injustice, because when I talk about food justice means nothing if you're not actively participating and working on dismantling the social injustices that you see. So don't tell me about food justice. I'm working on food justice. You got to be, it's an active movement. So you have to be actively involved in dismantling the injustices that you see along race, along land, along gender, along the historical content of trauma, all those things you got to speak up and speak out against. So now, if you want to know how to help, lobbying, reparations, donations, but speak up and speak out against the injustices that you see each and every day.
Thank you, Karen. And Dee, did you want to speak on that as well?
Yeah, definitely agree with all that. Educate yourself first of all, right? And then use, for people of color, for, white allies, white people, educate yourself first and then use your privilege and your positions of power to, advance, our Black food sovereignty and, to dismantle, as Karen rightly said, all those structures that oppress us.
Thank you. This has been an amazing conversation, and it is already 3:20. So I do have one more question for each of you before we wrap things up. Again, thank you so much for all the wisdom you've shared. But can you tell us about an initiative that you're involved in or in support of that you'd like to encourage our audience to donate to? And Dee, can you start us off?
Yes. So one of the things I've recently co-founded is the African and Caribbean Heritage Food Network. And it was literally born out of frustration around the lack of presence and voice, in all these spheres, in government, in academia, in policy, in education, in agriculture, lack of data, lack of disaggregated data, scholarship or concern for our health and diet, you name it. And so I've co-founded this with a friend and colleague from the London Food Board to address these issues. And our vision is for Black food sovereignty, right? And it starts with us uplifting our African and our Caribbean foodways and mentorship and advocacy, research and provision of services. So yeah, we need support, financial support.
Amazing. And this will all be shared on Twitter and Facebook. So the FoodShare Twitter and Facebook. Karen, can you share an initiative that you're involved in or in support of that you'd like to encourage our audience to donate to?
Definitely. So Soulfire Farm, which I'm on the board, it's a organization that's dealing with undoing racism in the food system, and we're about to expand. So we've outgrown ourselves. So we're in the process of really building more structures on the farm so that we can have more events, more trainings. And so we're doing a capital campaign. So just look for soulfirefarm.org. And yes, if you can support that, that'll be greatly appreciated.
Thank you for sharing that. Leticia, can you share one as well?
So one of the organization I would love for us to donate to is the Black Creek Food Justice Network. Is a network that was born out of the Black Creek Community Farm, and really is looking at community residents and Jane and Finch taking leadership role in addressing food insecurity. So that's a group that I would love for folks to support. The other group, I have multiple if I'm allowed to, is the Black Creek Community Farm, of course. I can't leave the farm out. So supporting that work that we've been doing. And then the other organization is Jane Finch Action Against Poverty. I think for a grassroots group, we've been around since 2008, I believe, and we've survived through it all, and we continue to cause trouble. And I think it's an important group to support as well in this work. And then my last one is African Food Basket, which is an organization that we partner with on sites that's also looking at Black food liberation and Black food sovereignty. And I think, yeah, those are really, really important work to support. Thanks.
Thank you. And again, this information will be on the Twitter and Facebook for everyone. Cheyenne, did you want to share an organization as well?
Yeah, so I'm going to say my own organization. I've started Sundance Harvest with nothing. I had no help. I had really nothing going for me to learn how to grow food, and I did it. And through my fierce stubbornness of my Aries energy, and also my determination to actually see an urban farm for profit that wasn't unethical and exploiting the Black community, I said, well, it's fun and all me farming in Toronto, but besides that, I really want to have a land trust. So I want to buy land and have a land trust because I'm noticing that I'm outgrowing my facilities, which is very fun and cool. So I would love people to donate towards Sundance Harvest, specifically toward the Growing in the Margins campaign, which is right on my website at sundanceharvestfarm.com. All the money toward that will go towards Growing in the Margins, making sure I can keep up free mentorships, but also toward buying land. And I'm actually looking at a few properties this month, and I'm really excited. And what I ultimately want to do is have a land trust so all my participants from Growing in the Margins can have a space to actually grow food on a large scale. That's what I want. And really creating those spaces and getting the piece out of learning and land out of the way so they can start their own food sovereignty work, because finding land and learning are the two biggest, I think, hurdles for Black femmes in food sovereignty work. So if I can help provide that, I really think that would be pretty revolutionary. So yeah, if you can donate, that would really mean a lot. Distributing those resources is reparations, and it does matter. It's a part of reparations, but it still matters.
Thank you all for sharing those amazing organizations. So there's many organizations to support. And like I said, we will be sharing this information on Twitter and Facebook. The time has flown by. Thank you everyone for this great conversation. Before we close, I want to thank each of our panelists. So Dee Woods, Karen Washington, Leticia Deawuo, and Cheyenne Sundance. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your wisdom with us today. I also want to thank the FoodShare event team. This was absolutely amazing. The turnout has been great. And just to bring this panel together over such an important and needed conversation. I also want to thank Christopher and Marcia, our ASL interpretation team, for supporting this event. And as well, I want to thank Megan Leonard, who designed the event poster, which was beautiful. And I want to encourage you all to pull out your calendars to save the date for our next panel discussion. So we're happy to announce that our next panel is called Leading While Black. And it's on July 22nd at 6 p.m. Eastern time. So save the date. And better yet, to stay connected with us, follow us on social media so that you can see when the details on the next panel is posted. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here and being part of this amazing conversation.